Hi friends, it's Becky, and I want to talk to you today about beaded chains because for the month of September, I am doing a personal challenge to myself to make at least 2 beaded chain necklaces every week. For most of my beaded chains, I'm going to be using copper craft wire to make my links. So I'm going to talk a little bit about copper craft wires, and I'll be demonstrating the 2 basic loops that I use when I'm creating my links and show you how I make them. So it's basically just an intro to making beaded chains video, in other words. But first, let's talk about tools. There are 3 basic tools that if you have these, you can make just about any beaded chain out there. The first is a round nose pliers because you're going to be making loops. You're going to want something you can create a round loop on or with. So round nose pliers are going to be the top of the list for that. The next are some chain nose pliers. They have kind of a narrower, pointier end to them than some other plier types. They also have a smooth inside of their jaw, so you don't leave marks or anything on the wire that you're using, but they also have these right angles or sharp edges around the edges so you can get a good sharp bend on your wires with them. So that's another tool that I couldn't live without. I couldn't do without any of these, without at least these 2. And then the third, super important for making chains, but you could do with regular pliers, are flush cutters. And if you see right here on the back of the flush cutter, it is completely flat. The edges of both of the sides, when they come together, they're absolutely flat. And that's because when you cut the wire, if you use regular wire cutters that have a beveled edge, where the edges kind of have a V shape when they come together, then that V shape gets translated to the wire and it kind of tents the edges of the wire. And so you end up with kind of a sharp pointy thing. There are some scenarios where you may want that, but when you're doing wire working like this, it's best just to have a nice flat edge when you cut it there. It is beveled on the inside, so only one side of the wire when you cut it will have that flat shape on it. The other side will have a pointy end, but you could just turn it around and just nip off that pointy end with that flat side of your flush cutters. So that's the tools, the basic tools that you want to use. There are some optional additional tools that I sometimes find really helpful when I'm making my links or when I'm making my loops. And one of those is my 6-step bail making plier. Like the round nose plier, you use it to form loops and to make tiny circles with. But unlike the round nose pliers, they're stepped up and they are a set width for the entire length of that step. So if I want consistency with my loops, I'll often reach for my 6-step bail making pliers first, because then I can make exactly the same size over and over again of my loops. You can still use your round nose pliers if you want consistency by making a little mark at the place where you like that that loop size, and then consistently using that loop or that part of your round nose pliers to make those loops. So again, this isn't an essential, but it's something that I really prefer to use for consistency's sake. But you can 100% grab a Sharpie, make a little mark, and have yourself a consistent size for your loops with your round nose pliers. Also, these casual comforts, I did a review of these when I first got them, and I have found since that review, I'll put a link to that review in the description below if you want, that I've used them consistently a lot more since then, and I haven't had as much repetitive strain in my hands since I started using those as I had maybe when I was doing this last year. I was making a lot of chains, and so there's a lot of repeated stress of rolling things and twisting things and pinching things that you do when you're making these, and having some quality tools that are ergonomic and fit to lessen that strain, it really helped. I'll put a link to again, my review of this, and also where I got these. I got them from Amazon if you are interested in trying them out. I've been using them consistently and I love using them. But another tool that again, if you've got some repetitive stress or you've got some strain, may help with making links is a one-step looper. And when we go over the anatomy of a loop, this will make a simple loop for you. It will not do a wrapped loop for you, but it reduces the need to have to repeatedly open and close and twist at the same time with this kind of a looper, because all you do is squeeze it and it does the loop, it cuts the wire, and it also does a little bend at the end. And they come in 3 sizes. I just bought a whole set. I also did a review of these, which I'll link in the description below. But I find that I don't use them as often as I do the other one. But sometimes when my wrists are getting a little hurty, which sometimes happens, I'll pull one of these out or something like that. You do want to, when you use these, use kind of a thicker wire. They're not as effective with thinner wires, but they work really great for like 20 to 18 gauge, even 16 gauge wires. So speaking of gauges, let's talk a little bit about craft wire. So they come in different gauges that tell you what size they are, and the lower the gauge number, the thicker the wire. So an 18 gauge is thicker, then 20 gauge is thicker, then 22 gauge is thicker, than 24 gauge, 26, and so on. The smaller the gauge, the thinner the wire, and the thinner the wire, the less strong it is when you start making loops with it. There's also different hardnesses. Is that a word? It doesn't feel like that should be a word. They come in different hardness levels. Most of the copper craft wire that I use is going to be somewhere between dead soft and medium temper. And a medium temper is going to be something that is a little bit firmer but still malleable. There's with other metals, like with silver wire or argentium or something like that, they come in different hardness levels. Like you have dead soft still, but you also have like half hard, which is a firmer wire, requires a little bit more work. I'm not using jeweler's wire that comes in those different metals. I'm using copper wire. I don't use aluminum. It's not as longevity wise, it's just not as good. It doesn't hold up well to repeated bending and then bending back. Copper wire holds up better than that, but it's just not, aluminum is just not as durable. So I stay away from it for the most part. But yeah, so you've got most of these, like parawire is going to be dead soft. The Potomac beads wire is going to be dead soft. Of the Beaded types of wire, the artistic wire is dead soft, and I believe so is the color craft. This was actually new to me. It came in a pack, and so I was like, well, okay, let's try this out a little bit. But then they've also got their German style, and that is a medium hardness or medium temper. It is somewhere between the dead soft and the half hard. So it's not quite as hard as half hard, but it is not as soft as the dead soft wire, which means there's a little bit more effort used to bend it, but then it will hold its shape a little bit better than some of these others. So there are trade-offs for both of those. There's also the fact that with dead soft wire, it can be kind of easier to overbend it. So if you're new to wire working, you may get frustrated with the dead soft wire because you will be moving it and bending it and it will overbend and you'll have to pull it back, or you'll say, oh, now it's like your loop will be wonky or tipped over to the side because it's a soft wire. And because it's a soft wire, just be gentle with it. You don't have to be as gentle with medium temper wire. So in some cases, that might be a better beginning wire to use, but it is sometimes a little more expensive as well. But yeah, the beadsmith wires, they also come, this is about a medium temper on the spool. They're both wire elements, but this one is dead soft. It actually says it on the label that it's dead soft. The other one is not. If it makes any impact to your purchasing decisions, like where things were manufactured, All of the Beaded wire and the Bead Smith wires were manufactured in Pakistan. The Soft Flex and Parawire are manufactured in the United States. I do not know the country of origin for the Potomac beads wire, and I did not have time to look that up before we did this. But these are the wires that I am familiar with and that I use. So one of my favorites is the Soft Flex. It just comes in a lot of fun colors. I've used it a lot, and I have found that I can trust it for it to not irritate my sister's skin if I was to make something for her with it. She has metal allergies, and the Soft Flex is just fine for that. Probably the Parawire is too, but I haven't tested it with the Parawire. But generally, if it's going to be, you know, like 100% or 99% copper, it will generally be good like that. Now the Soft Flex wire does come into different flavors. You've got the silver plated, which comes in different colors. So you've got rose gold, you've got the pewter, you've got silver, and the silver plating does increase the hardness for the Soft Flex wire a little bit. It's about halfway between the dead soft of this and the hardness of the German style. So it's like on a spectrum of dead soft, and then the silver plated, and then the German style. That's where it would be on there. So if you find yourself having difficulty with the German style because it's too difficult to move, but the softer wires you're overbending with, the silver plated might be a good solution for that. But this, again, these are preferences, things that you know, as you try different wires and different things, you find things that will work for you on that. All right, so again, we went over sizes, we went over the different manufacturers, I think. Let's go ahead and pull out some, wait, is this? I don't think this is 20 gauge. Hold on. No, that's 22. I think this was mislabeled. Hold on. I gotta, because I'm gonna forget. And I'm gonna be like, why is this 20 gauge wire so soft and skinny? 22. Yeah, okay. Sorry, 22 gauge wire. All right, so let's move some of this out of the way. I'm gonna just maybe stick with both of those. Gold? No, not gold. Gold is a little bit light. Let's go with some dark wire for demonstration purposes. I'll leave these two on here. And again, now since that's 22, not 20, I can have both of these here, and we can take a look at the anatomy of a loop with all of these. So there's two basic types of loops, and most beaded chain necklaces and most chains that you see, you're going to have variations on these types of loops. One is the simple loop, and it's simple because you've got your wire, you've got a bend, and then a loop that is made by going around the round nose pliers, and then you've got the end of your wire basically touching that loop where you had that bend. Oops. Loop, not toop. That's fine. You know what I'm talking about, right? And then you've got your end. So that's a simple loop, and then you've got a wrapped loop, which is you've got your wire here, there's another bend, but then you've got your loop, and the end of your wire, instead of just meeting the wire and ending there, it continues around until it's wrapped around the neck of that wire. So you have a wrap, a bend, a loop. And that's why this is simple and that's wrapped, because instead of wrapping it, you just make the bend. Now, why do you want to have this bend here on the neck? That's so that your loop is centered over your wire, because otherwise you would just have a loop that goes along like that or along like that. And in some cases, you're going to want that when you're having a fancy type of link that you're making. Like a figure 8 link is 2 simple loops without the bend. So you have the ends of both of those on there. It's just a type of link that you don't have to use that bend on. When you're doing a beaded chain, because you're going to have your bead sitting there like that, then you're going to want your loop that connects it to the other things to be centered with your bead. Simple, right? So let's demonstrate both of those using my round nose pliers. I'm going to grab the 20 gauge for my simple loops, and just as I'm going through here, whether you use simple or whether you use wrapped is going to depend a lot on what you're doing with the project and the gauge of the wire that you're using. I generally, for smaller than 20 gauge, will 100% always use a wrapped link. If I am doing 20 gauge or 18 gauge, that's when I feel more comfortable being able to use a simple loop on that. So let's do a simple loop real quick. I have the end of my wire here. I'm going to stick it here on my round nose pliers, and I'm going to choose a spot right next to this mark that I already made because I know I like the size of that. And then I just scooch that wire all the way around until it meets the other side. And when I start my simple loops, I like to do my loop first and my bend second. So now that I've got a loop, I'm going to stick the edge of my pliers right next to where that meets, give it a little twist, and that makes a little bend, and I've got myself a simple loop right there. Now, by itself, a simple loop is not super strong. It just isn't. And that's one of the reasons why you might choose not to use it. I'm going to do just another loop on the other side. Let's say you put a bead on here. On this loop. To make the other side of the loop, I'm going to bend the wire over the top of the bead. With this one, I have enough leverage that I could bend it without too much fuss. If there wasn't enough leverage, I would use my chain nose pliers to make that bend right there over the top of it. Now, I like to measure about 1 centimeter from the edge of the bead to where I cut my my wire, and I know from experience that holding it here, the bottom of my fingernail right there measures about 1 centimeter or 1/4 of an inch. You can 100% measure it when you cut it with a measuring tool if you don't have a 1 centimeter width on your finger like I do. But that's generally where I like to do that from. And then after you do that, you see that you do the bend first and then roll it up. And that gets you another little loop. Actually, let me, like that. And you see how those are different sizes? It's because I should probably mark there for that link. Hold on. See, this is how you do it. For that link size. There we go. So I'm going to do that again by rolling it up at that mark. I just did the middle of my pliers prior to doing this. See, that's a much more consistent size with that. And again, you could just use one of these to do these types of loops and get a consistent size every time. All right, so I've got my 2 links right there. Now, one of the main advantages of using a simple loop versus a wrapped loop, because, you know, there are some disadvantages to it. One of them being that they are not as strong. But one of the advantages is ease in putting them together, because then when you want to connect them, all you have to do is swing this edge open like a jump ring, connect it to the next link or to the next thing that you are connecting it to, and close it up, and then you've got your links together. But again, they're not as strong. This one's larger, so it's going to be weaker. So it will pull apart. This is taking considerable force, by the way, which is why for 20 gauge, I'm fine with it still, but 22 gauge, it's going to drift apart a lot easier. I'm just going to show real quick with this 22 gauge wire and a simple loop how much easier it will drift apart by looping that on here like that. So that's why 22 gauge or lower, I'm definitely going to be using a wrapped loop. So let's show a wrapped loop. And what I'm doing with my fingers when I do this, by the way, is I'm warming up the wire so that it's easier to work with, but I'm also taking some time to, you know, these little bumps in here, by just drawing my fingers along it, I can straighten it out a little bit so that beads will go on it a little bit easier. Now for my wrapped loops, I like to pre-string my beads and work from the spool. It's helpful for me to not waste too much wire, and also I can start doing it as sort of a, what's the word, like a production, so that I do multiple loops, multiple links at the same time, and then I can put them together later. So for a wrapped link, I'm going to start much further down than I did for the simple loop. I'm going to start here about 1.5 to 2 inches down, and you're going to want to make your bend first for this, and then use your round nose pliers or your 6-step bill making pliers. And I'm just going to grab the top of that bend right there, and then use my finger to push this around the top of my round nose pliers. Now you don't have to grip the wire with like a death grip. It's a good way to mar the wire. Just hold it. Just hold it right there. And then, I don't know if you saw me do that, I let go of the wire a little bit without taking it off of here. I just rotated this up so that this wire can continue around the bottom so that it crosses over. So you've got that like this. See here, right here? That's what I was talking about, a little bit of the overbend. It is possible to overbend a little bit when you've got this dead soft wire. So now I'm going to grasp the loop with my chain nose pliers. And again, don't need a death grip, just grab it so that you're holding onto it. And then again, dead soft, so it's not going to take as much effort as the other. I'm just going to push it around the end, around this middle part, about 3 times. Let's get a little closer, right there. And then I've got some excess wire, so I'm going to use my flush cutters and cut that off. And there's a little bit of a pokey outy bit here, so that's another use for your chain nose pliers. You'll just want to tuck that sharp end in a little bit. Sorry, my hand is in the way. There we go. And this is why I like to work off of the spool, is because then I can push my bead up, and I use my fingers to measure how much wire I want to cut from the bottom of the bead. I hold it up with my fingers, and about 2.5 fingers down, I'll cut that off, because that's enough wire that I can make a second loop with a wrapped loop. And for this, I'm going to grasp the wire with my chain nose pliers. You can measure how much space you need for 3 loops to fit in on your chain nose pliers. You could even mark it so that you're consistent with holding it there. I'm going to just grab it there like that, and then use my finger to push this over the top of it to make that bend. And that way I have some space down here for those wraps to go after I make my loop. I'm going to make my loop the exact same way with this one. Again, you don't have to grip it super tight, just a light hold so it's not moving anywhere. Pull that over the top. Open the round nose pliers and rotate them. And then pull this all the way around and straighten out your loop if you need to. So there's my second loop. Now, if you're doing multiple links, you may either want to put them together as you make them, or make all these links with their closed loops and then put them together with jump rings. So to close up this loop, you're just going to wrap it. Just go around the middle of that 3 times, or until you get down to the bead. There are ways of wrapping that Gem Hawks does a really good job of teaching. Ways of wrapping the bead so that they are even on both sides. I'm not going to be doing a lot of that because I just like to make my links and then have them be ready to make a necklace with. So once that's like that, I can't just swing open this loop and connect it to anything. But that's okay, because jump rings exist. Or what you can do, and I'm just going to make this loop a little bit faster without all of the explanation so that we can get to the part where I show you how to link them together. See, it's a little overbent in places because it's easy to do that with the dead soft wire. So how to link them to each other is before you start swinging this wire around the little neck. I'm going to just fix that. There we go. I'm going to just swing this open like that so that there's a little bit of space there. Attach the other link to it. Close that loop and wrap that wire around the neck. To make another link, and they're already connected. It's a very secure link. That's one of the best advantages of the wrapped loop, is how secure they are, how durable they are, how long they'll last, you know, because I could grab onto both of these with some pliers and pull, and it's taking a lot of effort for me to pull it, and that link is still not going anywhere. This one's a little bit looser and it has deformed, but that's how much force I was putting onto it. And keep in mind, by the way, the amount of force that I put on might be more than you are capable of doing, because I was a competitive powerlifter, so I have really good grip strength and I can pull like hundreds of pounds. So that's just a demonstration of how durable this type of link is to link with each other. But again, this is 22 gauge wire, so you know it's not going to pull a truck, but it will hold up pretty well to a child tugging on your necklace or something like that, because those things happen. All right, let me grab some 18 gauge wire real quick and just demo a one-step looper, because like I said, you can use this to make your simple loops instead of doing all of those other steps with these tools. It replaces basically all of these. So this is 18 gauge, and again, the lower the number for the gauge, the thicker the wire is. And once more, I am straightening it and warming it with my fingers before I get started. There's a little hole on here. You can put the end of the wire through it, or you can just have it be plain. Putting the wire all the way through it means you'll waste a little more wire when you do this. But let's get a little closer so you can see. It starts to bend it. This part will cut it. And as it goes all the way around, you can bend it, or if you just keep your hand where you're at when it's bending, it does that bend for you. And you end up with kind of a perfect little simple loop. Sometimes it's a little further open than you'd like it to be. And also this bit right here will get between your loop and your bead. And when that happens, you'll end up with a little more space between, oh, that's not going to fit on there. A little more space between, I just need a bead that will fit on my 18 gauge wire. There we go. A little bit more space between your bead and the loop. Let me show you on this one. That's what I mean by there being a little more waste. That was the bit that was in the end. All right. Oof. So I'm going to put this in here. And if I have the bead right up here next to it, when it goes through, it pushes against the bead. And you can see there's a little bit of space between each of those loops, but it will still make a link, and that link can still be used in your necklace, and it works really well. And like I said, these work better with thicker gauges like 18 gauge. It still will work with, say, 20 gauge, but sometimes it takes a little more work for you to get that. See, it works just fine with that. The thinner gauge wires like 22, it's not as great. And again, 22 gauge wire does not give you a very strong loop. Not as strong as a 20 gauge or 18 gauge. All right, so that is my loops and beaded link basics. If you have any questions, let me know. I am going to put links to my beaded chain challenge playlists. This is going to be in both of my playlists, both for this year and last year's. If you want to see some of the chains that I made last year, I will put a link to my review of the one-step looper and my review of the casual comfort. I'll put links to Soft Flex, where I really like their craft wire. I like using that a lot, but I'll put links to them. I'll put some links to Parawire, Beadalon, Beadsmith wire, and the Potomac Beads wire. I'll put all of those in the description below. And let me think, is there anything else that I wanted to go over? Oh, work hardening. Let's not forget about work hardening. So with these loops, especially the simple loops, With 18 gauge, you might not have to worry about that as much, but one way that you can make sure that your simple loops with your 20 gauge wire last a little bit longer is by work hardening them. And you can do that using your pliers that you already have. I like to just set it inside the pliers and give it a little smush with the pliers. It's the same type of work hardening that happens when you hammer your metal. Now, if it's a small loop like that, work hardening with the pliers is just fine and dandy. If you've got a larger loop and you want to work harden it, and you know, some reasons you might want a larger loop would be just for the aesthetic. But if you've got a larger loop that you're making, let me grab one of these guys so that I can make myself a nice large loop. All right, and for that one, instead of measuring it and then cutting it, I wrapped it around, and then where this end part meets the neck, I'm going to use my flush cutters and just give it a little snip there. And now I can use my pliers to close that loop. But if I want to work harden this, I can give it a couple of smush with some of my pliers, or I can pull out my bench block and put it on the edge, because you don't want to be hammering the bead, and this will also keep it sort of flat. And then just a little hammer, and then you can say stop hammer time and give it a little tap, and that will also work harden it. And that just makes it so that it will last a little bit longer than otherwise. You saw how that larger loop sort of drifted apart a lot easier. I'm putting some effort in there, and it's drifting a little bit, but it doesn't drift as much as the other one. So it is one way to make your loops last a little bit longer when you do your simple loops. All right, so there we go. Beaded chain basics, how to connect them, and again, you can just make these wrapped loops, and I sometimes will do that. I'll just make a whole bunch of wrapped loops, and then when I go to put them together, I'll just use some jump rings. It's kind of a preference thing, whether you use jump rings to put them together or put them together as you do it, like how you want it to lay, how you want it to fall. A lot of times you get kind of a slinkier slink, like a better movement of the chain, if you have those jump rings between the two links. And again, that's going to be a preference thing. So some of my necklaces I might use links, some of them I might just put them together as I make them. And often I forget to do the to link it to the next thing before I wrap it. And so it just saves a lot of wire with me having to cut it off and and start again and do a whole other link. Anyway, I hope you found this useful. And again, I will have links to all of that information that I talked about in the description below. Click more next to it to get all of those links. It might be a little bit difficult for you to access if you're watching this on a television, so go ahead and bookmark it and then just come back to it on a computer or on your phone, and you should be able to get to all of that information, all of those links. Also, if you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm glad to have you here. This month is going to be a little bit busy with me with this type of project. If it gets a little samey, I mean also same, but there's going to be some variations. These are the basic links that I'm going to be using. I'm going to be doing variations on this. Some of the links might be using bead weaving. Some of the links may be using some beading wire instead of craft wire. Some of the links will be different shapes, but we're going to be putting stuff together, and you are more than welcome to join me in this challenge. There aren't any prizes. It's just a personal challenge, just a way to expand your skills, to get a little bit better at what you're doing, and to also have some fun. And, you know, sometimes a little challenge helps me in my creativity, because I will say, how would I do that? And I can put that together. If you like what you see, hit the like button. If you want to see more, hit subscribe. Happy beading!